All right, welcome to the Dashboards Working Group for January 17th. Oh, no, it's January 18th. Just lost a day. All right. So we're in the weeds of definitions. We've got the spreadsheet. Now that we have long text in here, I'm just going to vertically align everything top or I'll lose my mind. Yeah. So I was trying to see if there were any comments on this sheet. So far, I think there's nothing that's contested or no discussions. Is that correct?
Looks to be the case.
Yeah. So I think the goal was from the last meeting, as we go through, if we are in agreement, we can leave our name in column F in a list if we feel that definition makes sense to us, or we can make modifications and comments on them.
I'm just quickly reading through the descriptions just to
Yeah,
make sure. But I think for the across the board, the important terms like panel, visualization, dashboard, and stuff seem fine to me.
and someone said the category of root panel, which I thought was kind of cool. Like the root is like the dashboard. That's new.
And what? Actually, that's interesting. I would kind of just like can dashboard also be a term for its own category? Like I kind of like, I don't know, in last week's discussion, I think it was last week, I kind of thought of dashboard as that root container, but I guess you could call it a root panel, but I don't know if that makes things more confusing or less. But
I would argue slightly more confusing. A dashboard can contain multiple panels, but a panel can't contain multiple panels.
Right.
Or if they can, we've got bigger problems.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, yeah, never mind.
Go ahead.
I was thinking, I think Optimize is working on multiple visualizations per panels, but I think that is explicitly, one to many panels to visualizations. I think we can all agree these are all containers, containing child objects, but I think calling this specifically root panel, I would be okay calling this root container. But I would also just say dashboard as well, because if we couldn't, or if that's too much, root container would make sense.
Mm-hmm. Is there any world where we would have multiple dashboards in some kind of a roll up or something? Like the dashboard container, you could have maybe like many that are collapsed or something like that in a view, or.
I wouldn't want to say it's not. I mean, it's certainly possible. I just can't imagine a case where that would be like absolutely necessary or not confusing to the user. I think I don't know if that's the goal of this working group, to like define what's sensible limits or not. At some point, like product analytics wants to have embeddable panels and dashboards, and theoretically you could put, if you really wanted to, 4 dashboards in a single page. But I think what I would assume for the average user, that would be too much information. That would be a little bit overboard.
I'm thinking about like our PI reviews in product. I don't know if any of you have gone to those. It's a huge, long YAML page, but like each team's graph or dashboard gets pulled up onto that big roll up. So it's like there could be a world where even a higher level thing is created, and maybe it's not called dashboard though. It could even be like Canvas or something more general, something where you're like pulling higher level things together for an executive report or something like that. But
yeah, that's something where I would imagine we would use views for, where like, we have like PIs for different contexts or groups, and then you can roll it up to an overview using the same data set, which would be that like high level rolled up like initial view, and then you can dive deeper into it. But I would still liken that to like one dashboard, given that it's like trying to deal with one data set around performance indicators. But I mean, I guess that's a conversation for a later time.
So we have the suggestion of instead of root panel, just call it dashboard or call it root container. I'm not really sure how to see like blame on this, like who suggested root panel, but I liked it from the idea that panels and dashboards have very similar characteristics, like titles, unique IDs, sometimes having filters. I get why maybe that was added, but I think it does get kind of confusing. We need the container around the panels to be dashboards, the dashboard.
I'm looking through the version history right now, and I think if I'm seeing my colors correctly, let me share my screen. Nope, sorry, I just reformatted and I don't have permissions and I have to restart. But it's showing you, Kristen, as
I wrote it.
But I wonder if that came out of our conversation last week about like panels and like root container, and I think maybe just panel just ended up there.
Maybe I mistyped it. So like I'm fine with dashboard here just as the category myself, especially if I wrote it.
Yeah, it looks to be one of your group sessions where you all were working for it while I was on holiday, from the version history I've seen.
Okay, so I'll take blame on that one. Let's leave it as dashboard category.
It was a working session. You were the one writing it down. Yeah. So it's still a mystery, but if we're all good with it, then we can just rename that.
And then that could be also root container. That was another contender for the category of items. If anyone would think that might be better.
My first pick is dashboard, but I'm happy to hear other people's thoughts.
You could build a just like text only dashboard, I guess, with the tools, and it wouldn't actually have any like panels or data. But yeah, I guess technically it would still be in a dashboard container.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you'd still use panels with just like, text only visualization, I guess, if you want to call it a visualization, but yeah. Like the panels are what you would use to rearrange it. So even if you're doing text only content, you'd still be using panels even. So.
Oh, so text content. So I was thinking those are organizational blocks that add white space between panels and things like that, kind of like in Sisense. Like you could add a title and they let you, and then you would have like a grid of panels beneath it and you could have multiple. I wasn't thinking, I think text content could be in a panel, especially a description, but we also need them at that bigger, higher level around the whole organization.
From a pragmatic sense, a dashboard will be a grid, a resizable, redraggable, editable grid in a lot of instances. So you wouldn't be able to have just a static floating bit of text content. The text content would either have to be in its own panel, which is then resized to like the full width of the dashboard or whatever to cause that separation, or it would be outside of that grid entirely, like as a heading descriptive content type at the beginning or end of a dashboard.
That latter would be confusing though, because we would have to introduce the concept of multiple grids or thereby dashboards, right? So, I mean, that was going to be my question as well, is like programmatically how product analytics is doing it. Text content would have to be in a panel because panels are what we use to define the dimensions of, this takes 50% of the entire dashboard width and is, excuse me, X amount of rows or like rows high and things like that. So even if you wanted to have a text heading similar to Sisense, where it's like, I want this to be like large or span the entire width of the dashboard, we would be treating that effectively as a panel, at least programmatically for product analytics. Jan Rod, correct me if I'm wrong.
You're not wrong. Matej, from Optimizer's point of view, would you ever have a text content outside in the way described, having it as a way of separating a dashboard?
So outside of what do we call them, panels, right? Not widgets. A text outside. I mean, titles, yes, maybe, but text like paragraphs, I can't think of why that would be useful. But titles, I can see, yeah, where you would be able to, put a title somewhere in the dashboard, and all the widgets below that are somehow related to that title, visually speaking, right? And then below it, maybe you have another title, or you have another one in another column, in another area of the dashboard. I think that could be useful. Yeah.
I think in Sysons, they just make them 100% with blocks, and then you can just dump them in. And you could use a little white space between things. So you can just, because that's where dashboards get kind of overwhelming sometimes if you can't break the flow of all the panels.
They are resizable though. Like I use them as kind of annotations in some of the dashboards I've built in Sysens.
True, right? Yeah, I guess they
Yeah,
can.
so effective. Like again, I wish I could. You know what? Just give me a minute. I'm going to restart Zoom. I'll be right back.
Do they have like paragraphs of text in Sysens as well? Yeah.
Well, it basically gives you a little mini WYSIWYG when you drag it on. So a lot of people just make them headers in there, and then there's no Chrome on it. It's not like it has like a panel Chrome or anything else.
Yeah.
It just like becomes a part of the canvas.
I've also seen it used as a way of like a next to a chart or visualization to describe what you are trying to visualize or what you're expecting to see out of that data, maybe what the thresholds are and stuff.
Because I think it makes sense to have the possibility of having text inside panels. Like in this particular case, I think those are panels, right, Dennis?
Yes.
Correct.
And you have, no, those are the titles of the panels again.
Right.
Is it North Star Metrics? That's the title, right?
Correct. So that's being formatted to be a heading, right? So effectively, you can we are programmatically treating panels like the panels are what you can put in the grid and resize. So I believe the topic is, we think text content is useful. It's just how do we treat it as far as do they belong in panels or not? And programmatically, at least with how product analytics is defining it, is that if anything is resizable within the grid, then it is technically a panel. So if I were to build a dashboard, I would add a panel, then add text content in that panel to be able to format it such that it's a heading or an annotation or a description of a chart, visualization.
So is that North Star Metrics, is that a panel as well? Or is it just a title?
They're called text elements, I think, in Sysens.
Okay.
The T.
Yeah. So that could be kind of something we want to discuss, is that maybe to the user, we treat it as a direct object where it's basically a panel with text content already included.
Yeah.
But behind the scenes, it's still a panel with a visualization on top, right? So like I don't want to make it sound like it's a hacky thing, but it's like a shortcut where you're only going to be adding text content, and then you can drag it around. But effectively, it's a panel.
Yeah, it would be a panel, but maybe it has different visual treatment.
Right.
Right.
So maybe if you want it to be frameless, as Kristen was saying, we could treat it as such.
I think switching like a quick switch between full width to, I hate it in Sysens actually. Like I put all mine full width to break it up, but like a full width and then like a horizontal spacer horizontal line, like a break or headers. Because like you leave a lot to the user to like get the design right in Sysens.
Yeah.
So it sounds to me then that a panel, we're in agreement that a panel can contain textual or non-graphical, non-visualization based content, like, as Kristen says, some kind of lined breakup content and other visual aids. So should we be moving that text content? Should we update that spreadsheet to have text content in the outside in reference to the dashboard as a whole, and then another set within panels.
I'm sure I follow that.
I think if they're grid elements, like we just talked about, like panel elements, that they could just be visualizations on the panel, and I don't think we would need them on the dashboard object, because that's what I was asking.
Right.
I think
yes.
they could just behave like a panel.
I agree with that. So like chart spreadsheet wise, like it belongs underneath panel. Text content would be effectively, whether you really believe it or not, visualization, which you could argue semantics on that. But at the end of the day, coming out to how the user interacts with it, that could be, you know, a combination thing that happens where they don't actually have to manually add the panel and then manually add the text content. So bringing it back, I think it would just belong under panel, unless anyone disagrees.
We've got name and description under the dashboard, which serves the same purpose on the dashboard level. So I'm happy just to have it under panel.
Right, that's the metadata you could use to describe the whole thing.
Yep.
Would the name in the panel be the actual title of the panel as well? Or are these two things separate?
I don't know if you need a title for these header content. Like I almost just wonder if
for header content, I don't think so. Yeah, but I don't know why I thought about the actual panels. Like you have a chart and it's in a panel, and then you have a name. Is that actually the title? Is the description? Is it also shown? How are we thinking about these things?
I think we would want the option, at least for panels, to like hide their title, in which case if we create this like text content shortcut, then you know panels don't actually show their titles. Like you wouldn't actually name those, but I think we're getting more into like how the user actually adds these into the dashboard. But
yeah,
my 2 cents is we have the unique ID, which could be a string. We're not just we're not saying functionally what that unique ID is. And then the name, I would say the title. If you want to rename that term to title, I'm happy to make that far clearer.
Which one? Oh, here, title, right?
Yeah.
On line 21.
Yeah.
Title.
I mean, it makes it a bit clearer that it's something that the user will see. Because the name could be, I don't know, you could set a name for a panel, but you don't actually see it, I guess, in the same way. No, for the dashboard, when you set a name for the dashboard, you see it on the top. You will see it on a page where you will choose which dashboard you want to open and things like that, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's awful when titles make URLs, like in Sisense too. I know we're getting too technical, but the unique ID should be the URL or the render so that you could make the title anything. If a user changes a title, it's annoying when it updates all of the URLs.
Yeah.
It just adds flexibility for both, I think, the dashboard level, and then also like if you had to embed a panel, I feel that unique code, whatever we generate, is what you'd want to be embedding or referring to, so it doesn't change.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And probably be root. I'm going into details, but if it's nested in a unique ID of a database, or sorry, the dashboard, then you're assuming it will always be on that dashboard. But like if you move that panel somewhere else, it might get a new home, a new parent, right? So that's like since they make you dupe everything, the whole thing, you create a whole new unique dashboard and then everything comes with it as a dupe.
Right. So currently with what we're building in product analytics, panels and visualizations are very portable, so they can be shared across multiple dashboards.
Okay, good. Like multi-parent.
Well, they effectively don't have parents, right? They're just standalone objects that you can include in your dashboard. So
their unique ID is standalone.
Right. So we refer to them by their unique ID, and then you could have 3 dashboards that always pull up, cycle time or something like that, and then
Mhm.
that wouldn't change. And if you updated it once, it would update it everywhere, that kind of thing. But then, of course, it's subject to dashboard level filters like date range and whatever else you have determining the subset of data.
That's cool. That's exactly how I think it should be built. And then, yeah, at some point, rendering for transparency where this chart is also being, like, who are its parents? Having some kind of list to look and show where it's like, oh, I'm on the CEO's dashboard with this one.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean,
I didn't realize.
it's two ways. It's just a different way. I think there's pros and cons with either way. I think I understand from SciSense's point of view that you're duplicating charts because you don't want to, maybe you don't want to inadvertently change the old dashboard. Whereas we're doing it from the other way where we want the portability and we want the reusability, but it could easily be done that you change something on a dashboard and don't realize that you're changing it on 5 others, right?
Mhm.
So I don't know that there's necessarily a right or wrong way. It's just what we think is the right convention for our product. So, but I agree. I would prefer it to be reusable and then make the decision of, you know, I need to copy this panel and make a separate version of it so that I
Right.
don't change other dashboards.
Retitle it.
Yeah, that's just my opinion.
Okay. So that's what I was just driving to there is, yeah, I think uniques are important, and then exposing if you're in a multi-parent situation and you realize, oh, my dashboard is included on Sid's dashboard and I just blew it all away or messed it up or put a date on there that's not happening or something. I think that transparency at some point is good to have on them. Okay. So we kind of went through dashboards as a high level, and then we got into panels and the text content. Does it make sense where I put lines 34 and 35? Should those just be nested under panel as a content, like maybe content type where visualization starts includes these? Like visualization would be the first one, and then maybe like text is a type.
I was just
Yeah.
thinking there were going to be like visualizations, right? So you could just have different types
Oh,
of
they're
visualizations.
under
in your-
that.
Yeah. So it's
What if, okay. If we're using like the GitLab standard, like list view, let's say, would you call that a visualization? So we've got like a list view of issues in our query.
yeah, you could argue it's not argue, but you could say it's a visualization. It's a representation of a list of rows or rows of data just as a list.
Yeah,
Same as
Yeah,
like
that's
a
like
table.
like a table view or yeah.
Yeah, table and list view I would say are visualizations.
yeah, that's why I'm purposefully championing that name because it's so broad. It kind of captures everything. And I really like Rafana's definition of that it's a graphical representation of a query. So it could be anything, could be a text, could be a table, could be a list, could be a line.
Okay. So let's just put GitLab content, GitLab list. We only have lists right now, but we need a table board renders of data. Can go under visualization. And then just generalize the text one to header, section, or line, the GitLab content list table board view. We don't have table yet, or we need it. So the date range property. Do we need to say anything about inheritance? Like if you didn't set something at the panel level, you would inherit from the dashboard, like a date variable.
We're talking about date range right now. Sorry, or what
Yeah,
time
like
currently?
none of these are marked as required yet, which I think is good, but if it doesn't have its own date range, for some of those core pieces, it could inherit it, like inheritance at the panel level from its dashboard.
Yeah.
Good.
Go ahead.
I think that would depend on whether we're setting the standard for how dashboards and filters should work. Currently in project analytics, it's a two-way decision. Two-way decision where we have dashboard level controls overriding that of panel or visualizations, but I'm not sure if we can speak for every other group that's going to build dashboard if that's how they want things to be built. But
I
that's,
think I think the last time we spoke about the opposite of panels actually overriding the dashboard level filters and date.
If
Remember,
set.
Kristen?
So like if someone decided to, that would override it.
Yeah.
But then if they hadn't, they would be inheriting whatever like date was set at the dashboard
Yeah.
level.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Is this how you understand it, Dennis, as well?
my understanding is that, and Rob, correct me if I'm wrong, we have the opposite set. So even if you have a date range defined at the panel level or visualization level, the dashboard one is the one that ultimately overrides it.
Interesting.
Am I correct?
My understanding is that we don't know yet. Like what we're trying first is just setting it at a dashboard level because that's the most useful. I can see it from both angles why it's viable, but I do think in GitLab we should probably try and settle on one like method, which is it's either it's either overriding from the dashboard level or from the panel level. Having it go like different ways on different dashboards is just going to create a confusing user experience.
Yeah.
Do we have override set up right now in product analytics though? I thought we chose one direction.
It is overrides from the dashboard level setup.
Yeah.
Currently, but I mean we don't have any UX around that. That's just how our data querying is working.
Yeah, the reason why I was supportive of dashboard level controls is that it's very easy for someone building a dashboard to set up. Let's say you've got 10 panels and each one has their own date range, and then and it's querying, one of them is querying 60 days, but your dashboard level is querying 30 days. Yeah, I think it's very confusing to set all these different limits and then override them at the individual panel level. Whereas it's a lot simpler to just say, okay, you can reduce the amount of confusion you have on your dashboard if the dashboard level filter is the one setting like the limit of what the panelists can use. And then ultimately having like for product analytics, for example, like if you don't like that convention, and it's again a two-way decision, but you could export that data and do something else with it if you really wanted to. But we just wanted to kind of reduce the amount of confusion that potentially could be caused by creating dashboards that every panel in a dashboard could just have its own limit. And so you might be looking at a dashboard and it says last 30 days, but panels are displaying whatever they feel like displaying. So it could be a year's worth of data or 7 days worth of data. And so I personally feel like it gets more confusing looking at a Sisense dashboard, for example, where you have these date filters that say 7 days, but then you have charts just doing whatever they want. That was my general reasoning behind it.
I should say, because product analytics is working on the concept that a panel is reusable, having one.
Sorry, visualizations are reusable. Panels are configured on a dashboard.
Sorry, correction. But it means that we can define on the visualization a set number of filters that get applied to that data set on that visualization. Because that visualization is then reused within multiple, could be reused across different dashboards and their panels. Having the visualization and panels define their filters and not get overridden by the dashboard can cause serious problems from a user's point of view. But it does make sense if you're looking at it, say if you want a dashboard where you've got the last 7, 14 and 30 days of something, and you haven't set any filters on your dashboard, you've defined no filtering at all. So then you've got a fixed dashboard that allows you to set that kind of observational data in a Grafana sense, or you could have a dashboard which allows you to do filtering and not have that restriction in place. This is confusing.
It's a bit hard to imagine all these things without any visuals or anything. So at least to me, I don't know.
Maybe we need to make some. Maybe we need some lines and boxes.
I was about to exactly also suggest that. I think this is something that where we can, as an action item, maybe create some visuals and expand on what is possible, what is not possible, going in both directions. Like, if we do it this way, we can do this, but we can't do this, and vice versa. Because yeah, just talking about it is, especially while all of our terminology is also in flux, is kind of difficult.
Mhm.
Yeah, it also goes out of the context of the naming of the stuff. But I guess going back to date range, I think not having it required is fine.
Yeah.
For now, until we have more
So-
information.
Yeah, because I was just thinking the use case, like, let's say I just know I need a panel up security issues or something like that, and I didn't configure the whole dashboard date range, and I just set my query up at the panel. Can that work? But we could also always add specificity later, like if we're thinking in terms of MVC, we could say we always inherit from the dashboard level no matter what. And later on, we could add more specificity at the panel level that overrides it if we want to, or if we hear it from our users all the time.
You can
like adding
currently do
more-
both. It's just a matter of what, if you set one
Oh.
required over the other, is more like we're discussing now, like like pattern like conventions, right? So we support both, but we're not requiring you to do either. Though you ideally would want to.
Yeah,
But we're not saying you have to do one over the other right now.
okay. Could I make a dashboard that just doesn't have the configured filter bar at the top of the dashboard with a date range? Could it just be
That would
blank and
depend
I
on
put
which
one
group you're
text?
asking, because
panel?
like theoretically you could query all of the data, but product analytics is not allowing you to do that, because that would be like, we're having shared data clusters. And so that would be a very expensive and long running query to do. So we're trying to add what we think are sensible defaults, so that if you don't have a date range defined, we'll start you off with 7 days. And then if you want to change that, you can go beyond that or limit that.
Okay,
And that would be a convention that we may want to, we should eventually discuss, though that will change depending
Yeah.
on what data source you're using, because our data source is not going to be the same as other groups, for example, like
so
Optimize.
date range is required and you're bringing it down for optimizing like to 7 days. Whereas let's say I was looking for all my issues, the date range technically is all time since inception,
It's
but
not,
it,
I guess we are requiring it. Like Jan and I just kind of had this discussion, like we're limiting it to 30 days for now, but ideally we would want you to be able to query all of it. But that would really depend. Like, we're still doing like cost and scalability assessment for like how product
Right.
analytics is doing it. So we don't know if we can, but theoretically, like as it's currently defined, we're just placing limits, even though you could query all of it. Sorry, Matej.
Yeah, I concern there is, okay, so you could query all of it. We're limiting to 30 by default right now. If we keep that, we'll need to reflect that in the UI somehow. Because in that example that Kristen gave, where if she wants to have a list of security issues, right? It doesn't need to be filtered by a period to be useful, right? Maybe she wants a list of all of them.
Right, but it depends on the data
source.
source, right?
Yeah.
So like whether you're querying Postgres or the GitLab included
Issues.
ClickHouse or product analytics ClickHouse,
Yeah.
like they're all going to have different limits in place. So I guess maybe I'm misunderstanding like the question, but like I don't think we need to decide whether it's required right now, because like that's very context dependent and data source dependent. But I guess if your question is, can you just pull up a list of all security issues of all time? Yes, you could. But whether that you could do that in product analytics or in Optimize or in, Verify's dashboard, like I don't think any one of us can answer that, because it depends on the data source. Does that make sense? So I guess it doesn't make sense to like
Yeah.
require it because it can vary, is what I'm trying to say.
So our GitLab API, technically, we could connect and pull all the issues like we do on any list page, but that would be the data source itself. We would just configure that. If I pull issues into Notion, they cap it at 20,000 to any API connection, and we have 40,000 issues, so I can't use it.
Yeah,
They tell you about it though, right? They notify that it was limited to 20,000.
Yeah, it just our repo breaks it because we have 40K.
Okay.
But
I mean, even our
technically,
API,
we
I
could
don't
set
think we can
any.
list all of it. So
Yeah.
I think
If we're building it for our internal objects like MRs or issues, like I see us building cool queries where you could like have issues and MRs in the same view with like filtered on the same list or the same labels and like get some really cool stuff going. I don't know that we would have to limit it the same way we would on some of the ClickHouse stuff because we're already doing a lot of those more expensive queries throughout the whole app.
Yes and no, because when you look at issue boards, for example, it doesn't load all of the issues in that label. It keeps infinite loading or infinite loading them. And so our API will already page it. So
True.
it just really depends on where, like, a general rule of thumb is you shouldn't query all of the data, even if it's like performant, or I mean, even like, I don't even think like nothing's perfect. Like ClickHouse is going to have querying issues as well. And we're going to have limits in place. So I don't disagree that the utility of having all the issues merge requests of all time makes sense. But querying that and also rendering all of that on the same page is difficult. But I don't know, going back to like the date range thing, like, yeah, I wonder if we're like kind of getting away from the naming part of it though. I'm getting confused.
I think that if we weren't showing all the security issues and we said we were, that would be a big problem. So yeah,
I feel
if we
like
weren't
that
able to.
that limitation is a problematic one. From a database point of view, there are ways we can pre-aggregate data, so we're not having to run that query every single time. We can instead run it in the background in at regular intervals to get close to near current data for those kind of long-running queries. That's a programmer's problem rather than a.
Yeah, but I think what Kristen is saying is like, do we allow users to query all the data and show it all? Like, right? Am I understanding that correctly?
I'm saying it only from the planning side of GitLab's objects, the things that we already see on lists and views. I don't, with ClickHouse and the things that all of you are dealing with, that's like way more data hungry and complex. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about just the data source, which is the internal app and the views we already have in GitLab that sometimes are paginated.
They should all be paginated. So it would be similar to how you view issues in the repo. You get the counts for all of them, but notice how you never have like specific pagination on the issue list itself. It's always preview and next, right? So like you can theoretically thumb through all of the issues, but you can never list all of them on one page.
Right.
So you are working with the full data set. You just can't display it all at once.
Yes.
And there's going to be similarities of that.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you're never not going to be working with the entire data set. It's just going to be reduced in terms of output.
But in terms of like making it required that you define a date range, that's I don't think that's going to change depending on which group you ask, because they're going to have different data sources to work with. But you're always working with the full data set. It's just you might have different patterns of like you just have to thumb through it manually because that's the only way we can reasonably query show you all of it. Because if we have 40,000 issues, if you showed 40,000 in a list item or a list view or a table view, your browser, your page will probably crash anyways.
But rendering a chart is where those things get more interesting, like the 40,000 issues, like the backlog over time getting bigger, things like that. Rendering it, obviously, it's not useful to page through 40,000 issues, but when we get into visualizations of it.
Right, but visualizing 40K, you're not actually putting all 40,000 points onto a chart, right? You're aggregating that into some type of roll up by day or week or month, that kind of stuff. So
Sure. Yeah.
you're like, you can
Good
always
bias.
query, you're like Rob said, you're always working with the full data set. It's just how you choose to aggregate it and represent that. So even when we say like, you know, I guess you could say like, give me like all users of all time, like over month by month, you're still querying the full data set to generate that monthly roll up.
And
I would think that like the GitLab backlog creation over time would be like a standard one we could just test off of based on creation date and some kind of view 13 years.
it's also worth noting that a visualization is going to have far less content, data, I should say, than an issues list. It will have a singular data point and maybe a label. And that is pretty much all you're going to get out of it. You might get a link or some other thing, but other than that, in terms of passing and outputting that data on a programmatic level, it's much more reduced, which is why you can visualize it, and rolling it up helps. This sounds like a per group or per dashboard issue, and I've rather than a default, it sounds like we should just leave it up to the individual group that are making a new dashboard, because there's going to be performance concerns, UX concerns, security concerns, and all of these things are best handled by the domain experts. Nothing's going to get through GitLab's review process without people noticing that something's going to be drastically wrong if we try and do something that you shouldn't. We should just make sure that they have the power to set those controls, and maybe have in our documentation a recommendation that they should have pre-filtering of some kind.
So we're good to not touch the required columns on date ranges, right? I'm just like
I
trying to
think
bring
so.
it back. Yeah. Okay.
I think the default is just it's like all time if you don't have it on. Like if you don't have a date range set, it just means all time.
You will instantly crash your dashboard if you start trying to query data that too much data. So it'll become immediately apparent that the idea is a bad one if you start trying to collect too much anyway.
So I wouldn't even go with all time, Kristen, because I think that's going to depend on the group again. Because I think you're going to hit like.
I'm thinking from the perspective of customizing dashboards as we move forward. I'm taking that role where as a PM, I could go build some views for myself, my issues that I care about, things like that. However, I think that what we currently have for customers, that should be configured. The date ranges should be set. It should be thought through. But at some point, I want like open season to be able to create a view of like my team's security issues or things like that.
I get the use case, but again, like we're going in circles a little bit. Like it's some security issues. Yes, theoretically you can query of all time, but it's going to be dependent on the dashboard you're trying to build and what data sources you're working with.
Yeah. I think if we give tools such as our scoped filters and things like that as ways to cut down data at the beginning, like for me, I always scope to group foundations. Some of the high level scoped labels can get people to a place where they're already looking at a subset of the data and it's less than the whole. But a lot of our customers just go build their own dashboards because of the limitations of what they see. So at some point, they're going to want to be able to query issues, MRs, core objects.
Yep, and hopefully once the output of what we worked on will give a group the tools they need to start building their own dashboard and solving those problems for our users.
So I hope I'm not blocking anything there. I have strong opinions loosely held. I'm just trying to provide the mindset of like, I'm a PM who's going to query all the things and build out a Kristen HQ or something that's got all the stuff that I jump around GitLab to look at every day. The data source concept itself is not actually written on the dashboard here. Just looked. Data source is on panel, or yeah, the config panel. Would we want to bring that one up onto the dashboard or have it in both?
I think we're currently exploring panels and having multiple data sources, so you can theoretically have a dashboard with panels with different data sources. So I don't know that it would make sense to bring it up to the dashboard level.
Okay.
I would argue that discussion, you'd probably say something more along the lines of root level container that contains many panels.
Yeah, it says has a key data source. The dashboard definition on E2.
And just root level container that contains multiple panels. for now.
Panels. Let's change that. Multiple panels. Dashboard variable is one that I added. I don't know if that's what I was trying to get with like some of the key, like for me, I always filter to one thing like group foundations or a specific date that's set at the highest level of the dashboard, and then every panel can render off of that main selection, but I don't know if variable is the right word, if we need that, or if it should be something else, such as like a filter variable that's set at the dashboard level, or a filter setting.
Don't have a strong opinion on that. I mean, variable is generalized enough that you can use that variable for, or you can use that value for multiple things, whether that's for a filter or something else. So I'm not like, I don't think we, Product Analytics has really explored that concept yet. So
So it's a
keeping it
placeholder
general
for
is
a
fine.
value that could be accessed by panels as necessary or something, or could be configured at one point, and then that every panel has access to pull that variable or that list of variables.
I'm not sure I really understand how would that be different from a filter? Like in what scenario would you use a variable rather than a filter?
It's reusable across a dashboard or panel level. So say, for example, you're trying to write a PI dashboard for the product analytics group. You can define that as a dashboard variable, use that in the filter at the dashboard level, but then have panels use that same variable for, I guess what you're saying is like, would you have to reuse it in a lower level? But I don't know if you end up querying. Yeah, actually,
No,
I don't know if that makes sense for product analytics.
Or
We're not allowing you to like manually query, like you're not writing your own SQL. So I'm not sure if you like filter by it, then it's already going to be set by that.
if we called something, let's just say group underscore name there, and I set it to my team name, I could like render that variable in my titles of every panel or something else. Like that's like would be the simplest use.
I see. I guess, yeah, I guess like for product analytics, we probably, I can't imagine that we would have something like that, because we would just have our dashboard designer to like edit that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think titles may be useful, but I've only ever used that in the sense of like manual querying in Sisense, for example, which I don't believe Product Analytics plans to do, at least anytime soon.
Yeah, but
They're
what
The
probably
I'm
concept
all
of it is
filters.
fine. Like if
Yeah.
there are others that are planning to use it, then I mean that's okay.
It's for
But then it's-
consistency when you have like a huge amount to update.
Yeah, like my point is just like from Dennis, from what you've said, it seems like it is a filter variable. So I wonder if we need to have a distinct terminology or like word for it separate from filter, or does it like fall under that?
Well,
I can understand. I can.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I want to say I can like I understand the need to have a variable if it's like editing stuff that isn't related to the query, like editing the title or something, like having this variable and then it applies to the stuff in like a visual way that doesn't edit the query.
Yeah, I think that's the use case that Kristen just described in terms of like setting a variable and using that for multiple titles or something like that. I don't see that as a product analytics use case, but I can see that that can be useful for other dashboards. Yeah.
And definitely we wouldn't like build that out yet, but it's just something to think about. Filter variables is something you said, Ihan, too, and I don't know, that concept of whether I searched a string like the word sus across titles or something, or it was like or dates or labels or whatever else, those have to be kind of saved in some object and then available to the other panels.
But wouldn't that be the same as like dashboard variables? It's just a filter using like what I was trying to say before is that dashboard variables are generalized enough that if you want to use it in a filter, you can. If you want to use it in a title, you can, so that we don't have to define variables at different levels, right? My understanding of this definition is that this is just like a root level variable that can be reused all the way down if necessary, or at the same at the dashboard level.
Okay. I'm just thinking filter variables might be slightly different because they would expose in the other UIs like automatically because they'd be changing the data set. If they're set at that high level.
Wouldn't a filter using a dashboard variable do the same thing?
Yeah,
Like,
I don't care what we call them. It could be either.
Okay.
To me, dashboard variables like separate probably from searching, but we can just remove that and just leave the other. I know we're at time here too, I just realized. So how about for next steps, we all review these and put our names on if there's ones that we feel are correct. And by our next meeting, we'll have more to go through. And let's look at the visualization too. Is that something that someone wants to take on? Just the inheritance or showing like the filter and the dashboard and the panels so that we have like a working image of what those things are and how they relate.
Yeah, happy to do that.
Haven't you already created one, Jan?
Some basic stuff, yeah, but I'll
Okay,
I'll just extend like basically what I've already created.
that's good.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. That was a really good discussion today. I learned a lot. All right. See ya.
Bye.